A dying mother's wish led him to the woman who changed everything: emotional Western romance. The Montana sky stretched endless and blue the day Thomas Brennan rode into Redemption Valley, carrying his mother's last words like a stone in his chest. She had gripped his hand with surprising strength for someone so frail, her eyes urgent despite the fever consuming her. "Promise me you'll stop running from life, Tommy. Find a woman worthy of the man I raised. Build something that lasts." He had promised, though the words felt hollow. At 32, Thomas had convinced himself that solitude suited him just fine. The ranch, the cattle, the brutal honesty of hard work, these things made sense. People were complicated. Love was a gamble he'd seen too many lose. 3 months after burying his mother in the family plot overlooking the Bitterroot Mountains, Thomas found himself standing in the general store, staring at a wall of canned goods without seeing them. The owner, Fletcher, cleared his throat twice before Thomas noticed. "You planning to buy something or just admire my inventory?" Fletcher asked, not unkindly. "Sorry, mine's elsewhere." "I can see that. You've been walking around like a ghost since Margaret passed. She was a fine woman, your mother." Thomas nodded, the familiar ache settling behind his ribs. "She was worried about me. Dying wish and all that, wanted me to find a wife, settle down properly." Fletcher's weathered face creased into something between sympathy and amusement. "Mothers have a way of knowing what we need before we do. Speaking of which, I could use some help. Schoolteacher we hired from back east arrived last week, and her trunks are still sitting at the depot. I promised to get them to the boarding house, but my back's been giving me trouble. You willing?" That's how Thomas found himself loading 3 heavy trunks onto his wagon, wondering what kind of woman needed so many books. The depot master had complained about the weight, tapping one trunk with his boot. "Feels like she brought a whole library." The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a neat white building with blue shutters that housed the few unmarried women Redemption Valley could claim. Mrs. Hewitt, who ran the place with military precision, directed him to haul the trunks upstairs to the corner room. He was maneuvering the second trunk through the narrow doorway when a voice stopped him cold. "Please, be careful with that one. The binding on those volumes. Looms is already fragile." Thomas straightened too quickly, cracking his head on the doorframe. Pain shot through his skull as he turned, a curse dying on his lips. She stood in the hallway backlit by the afternoon sun streaming through the window, and for a moment Thomas forgot his name. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense that the dance hall girls down the street painted themselves to be. Her beauty was quieter. More devastating dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, intelligent green eyes that assessed him without pretense, a face that reflected character more than vanity. "I'm sorry," she said, moving forward with concern. "Are you hurt?" "Just my pride," Thomas managed, suddenly aware of the dust covering his shirt, the 3-day stubble on his jaw. "You're the new teacher, Josephine Hartford." She extended her hand like a man would, direct and confident. "And you are?" Her grip was firm, her palm calloused in a way that surprised him. This was no delicate Eastern flower afraid of honest work. "Thomas Brennan. I run a cattle ranch north of here." "Mr. Brennan, I appreciate your help with my belongings. I'm afraid I couldn't bear to leave my books behind, please." Actuality be damned. Something in her phrasing, the slight defiance, the unapologetic ownership of her choices, made him smile for the first time in weeks. A woman who values books over dresses. That's different. "I have 3 dresses, Mr. Brennan, which is precisely enough. But I have 247 books, and even that feels insufficient." She moved past him into the room, running her hand over the nearest trunk with obvious affection. "These contain entire worlds. Adventures I'll never have, knowledge I'll never otherwise access, ideas that challenge everything I think I know." Thomas found himself leaning against the doorframe, forgetting about the 3rd trunk still on his wagon. What's a woman who talks like that doing in Redemption Valley? No offense, but we're not exactly a hub of intellectual society. Josephine turned to face him, and something flickered across her expression, pain, quickly masked. "Let's just say that sometimes running toward the middle of nowhere is the same as running toward freedom." He understood that better than she could know. Fair enough. We all have our reasons. Over the following weeks, Thomas discovered that Redemption Valley. Lay's new school teacher was unlike anyone he'd ever met. She taught reading and arithmetic to children whose parents could barely write their own names. She organized a lending library from her personal collection, staying late to help ranch hands who wanted to learn. She wore the same 3 dresses without shame, and could discuss everything from irrigation techniques to Greek philosophy. She also, Thomas learned, had absolutely no sense of self-preservation. He was in town buying supplies when he heard the commotion outside the saloon. A crowd had gathered, and through the gaps between bodies he spotted Josephine standing toe-to-toe with Jack Holloway, the meanest drunk in 3 counties. Thomas pushed through, arriving in time to hear Josephine's clear voice cutting through Holloway's slurred threats. "Your son has potential, Mr. Holloway, but he can't learn if he's too exhausted from working your claim. He's 8 years old. He should be in school." "My boy works, just like I did," Holloway snarled. "Don't need some uppity woman from back east telling me different. Then you were deprived of an education too, which explains your current circumstances." Her tone remained calm, factual, which only enraged Holloway further. Thomas stepped between them as Holloway lunged forward. "That's enough. Stay out of this, Brennan." "Can't do that." Thomas kept his voice level, but his posture made his intent clear. "The lady was just leaving. Were you Miss Hartford?" The look Josephine gave him could have stripped paint. "I was not, in fact. Yes, you were." Thomas met her eyes, willing her to see the danger she was courting. Holloway wouldn't hesitate to hit a woman, and Thomas would have to kill him for it, and the whole situation would spiral into tragedy over pride. Something in his expression must have convinced her. Josephine stepped back, gave Holloway a final withering look that somehow contained more contempt than any curse, and walked away with her head high. Thomas found her an hour later sitting on the creek bank behind the schoolhouse, throwing pebbles into the water with more force than necessary. "You want to tell me what that was about?" He settled onto the grass beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Justice. Fairness. The basic human right of a child to be a child rather than a beast of burden." She threw another pebble. "That boy, Samuel, is brilliant. He could be anything with the proper education. Instead, he'll break his back in a played-out gold claim until he's as bitter and broken as his father." "You're probably right. Then why did you interfere?" "Because Holloway would have hit you, and then I would have had to shoot him, and you'd have blamed yourself, and that boy would have no father at all, worthless as he is." Thomas picked up his own pebble, turning it in his fingers. Sometimes the winning move isn't the satisfying one. Josephine was quiet for a long moment. "I hate that you're right." "Me too, mostly." He skipped the pebble across the water 3 hops. "You really think you can save every kid in this valley?" "No, but I have to try to save some of them. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" She gestured broadly at the world around them. "We're given these brief lives, Mr. Brennan. Shouldn't we use them to leave things better than we found them?" Thomas thought about his mother, about her insistence that he find something beyond the routine of survival. "My mother would have liked you." "Would have?" "She passed 3 months ago. Last thing she asked was for me, to stop hiding on the ranch. Find a worthy woman, she said. Build a real life." Josephine's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, and I think your mother was wise. Why did you really come here?" The question escaped before Thomas could reconsider it. "You said something about freedom." She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that spoke of old wounds. "I was engaged. Richard came from the right family, had the right prospects. Everyone told me how fortunate I was. But he wanted a decoration, not a partner. He forbade me from teaching, said my education was unseemly. When I refused to give up the school I'd started for factory workers' children, he gave me an ultimatum. You chose the school, I chose myself, which made me unmarriageable back home, a 28-year-old woman who rejected a good proposal. My own father stopped speaking to me. So when I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana territory, I sold everything that mattered to everyone else and bought the things that mattered to me." She gestured back toward the boarding house and her trunks of books. "I came here to be useful on my own, with terms." Thomas found himself awed by her courage. She had given up everything familiar for the sake of her principles, had traveled alone into unknown territory, had built a new life from nothing but will and books and determination. "That fiancé of yours was a fool," he said quietly. Josephine looked at him then, really looked at him, and Thomas felt something shift in the air between them. "And what kind of man are you, Thomas Brennan?" "The kind who's starting to think his mother was right about most things." Their friendship grew like the Montana summer, slowly, then all at once, with an intensity that couldn't be denied. Thomas found excuses to come to town more often. Josephine started taking Sunday rides out to his ranch, ostensibly to see the mountains, but really to sit on his porch and talk until the stars emerged. They discussed everything. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother who had secretly encouraged her education, about the loneliness of being different in a world that demanded conformity. He told her about his father's death when he was 16, about learning to run the ranch through trial and error, about the weight of being responsible, for something bigger than himself. "Don't you get lonely?" Josephine asked one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Out here by yourself?" Thomas considered the question honestly. "I did, though I didn't let myself think about it much. Loneliness felt safer than the alternative, which is letting someone close enough to lose them." He thought of his father, of his mother. Everyone leaves, one way or another. Josephine's hand found his on the porch railing, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. What if they don't? What if someone stays? He turned to face her, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Is that what you'd want? To stay?" "I've spent my entire life being told what I should want," she said softly. "Society says I should want a husband who keep me like a prized horse, well fed and admired but never truly free. My family wanted me to want respectability more than authenticity. Richard wanted me to want the version of myself that pleased him most. And what do you actually want, Josephine?" She stepped closer, her green eyes fierce and certain. "I want to teach children who hunger for knowledge. I want to read OKS that challenge me and have conversations that matter. I want to wake up in a place where the sky goes on forever and the mountains make me feel small in the best way. I want to build a life with someone who sees me as a partner, not a possession." I want her voice caught. "I want to stop being afraid that wanting anything for myself makes me selfish." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't seem to realize she'd shed. "You're the least selfish person I've ever met. And for what it's worth, I want you to have all of those things." "Just those things?" "No." He leaned his forehead against hers, breathing in the scent of her books and lavender and something uniquely Josephine. "I want you to have them here. With me. I want to wake up next to you and debate philosophy over breakfast. I want to build you a library where you can keep 1,000 books if you want them. I want to be the man who's worthy of the woman my mother somehow knew I'd find." When Josephine kissed him, it felt like coming home to a place he'd never been, like finding something he hadn't known he'd lost. Her hands fisted in his shirt, anchoring them together as the sky burned brilliant above them and the world narrowed to just the two of them, finally brave enough to reach for something real. They married in September in the small church with half the valley in attendance. Mrs. Hewitt cried. Fletcher gave Josephine away. Even Jack Holloway showed up, sober, with his son Samuel scrubbed clean and wearing his first store-bought shirt. The boy was back in school, and though Holloway still drank, he made sure Samuel attended every day. Thomas built Josephine her library, a whole room in their expanded ranch house, with floor-to-ceiling shelves that she filled with those 247 books, and then hundreds more. She continued teaching, riding into town 3 days a week, while spending the other days helping run the ranch with a competence that surprised everyone except Thomas. On their first anniversary, sitting on that same porch where they'd first confessed what they wanted, Josephine rested her head on Thomas's shoulder and said, "I need to tell you something." His heart stuttered with sudden fear. "What is it?" "I'm happy." She said it simply, but her voice carried wonder. Genuinely, completely happy. For the first time. "In my life, I'm exactly where I want to be, with exactly who I want to be with, doing exactly what matters to me. I didn't know this was possible." Thomas pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "My mother told me to find a worthy woman. But what I found was so much more than that. I found my partner, my match. The person who makes every day better just by being in it. Your mother was wise. She would have loved you, probably would have liked you more than she liked me." Josephine laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "Tell me about her. I want to know everything." So Thomas talked, sharing memories he'd kept locked away because they hurt too much. But with Josephine's hand in his and the stars emerging overhead, the pain transformed into something sweeter gratitude for the woman who had raised him, who had known even in her final moments that her son needed more than solitude, who had made him promise to find what he'd been too afraid to seek. He had kept that promise, though not in the way either of them expected. He hadn't found a worthy woman to fill an empty space in his life. He'd found an extraordinary woman who'd helped him build an entirely new life, one rich with purpose and partnership and the kind of love that made everything else make sense. Years later, when their daughter asked how they met, Thomas and Josephine would exchange a glance and smile. They'd tell her about trunks full of books and a chance encounter in a doorway. They'd tell her about a mother's wisdom and a woman's courage. They'd tell her that sometimes the greatest adventures don't come from running towards something, but from being brave enough to stop running and let yourself be found. And every word would be true.